Next, we have Mr. Bill Still.
Well, yesterday I got an email from my Texas coordinator that I thought was pretty interesting. Quote, I think Congress should wear uniforms, you know, like NASCAR drivers, so we could identify their corporate sponsors. And I thought that was a pretty good idea. You know, that's really the problem with our current system. You have this giant roadblock for the average American trying to discern the truth because our politicians are so donation-driven. But there's another problem, and that is the mass media. Libertarians are the intellectuals of the American political process. All of us had different paths to get into this hall today. But most of us arrived because we didn't trust the political process, and we were actually willing to read stuff. The average American isn't like that. The average American depends on TV news to form their political opinions. That's why J.P. Morgan began a program to buy the nation's newspapers over 100 years ago. How does that translate today? Well, I have these two friends who worked for one of the big three news networks when my last film, The Secret of Oz, was released. Incidentally, it won Best Documentary of 2010. These guys, I'm going to call them James and John, called me up and told me this story of how J.P. Morgan controls the network. James was the president of the radio division, and Robert was the number 2 guy, the head of the radio news division. They told me that the network, all networks, are so deeply in debt to Morgan that they can't even afford to make the interest payments on their debt completely, just like the U.S. government, incidentally. So they rely on Morgan to roll over their loans. So about 18 months ago, Morgan told the network that they had to fire the top 150 execs or their loans would not be rolled over and the network would be out of business in a week. That put these guys on the street, but John further told me that he could never do a story on me, even though he's been a friend of mine for over 30 years, even though he loved the film because I was so anti-bank. So for the average American, if the media isn't willing to tell the truth and the politicians won't tell the truth, it takes a lot for the average American to finally stumble through the door in the back of this room and into our presence. So here's the interactive portion of my presentation. Question number 1. This is multiple choice. A or B. Is the Federal Reserve part of the U.S. government or is it a private corporation? Show of hands for those who think it's part of the U.S. government. 1, 2, 3. Show of hands for those who think it is really a private corporation. The vast majority. Well, that's good. Well, here's what Governor Johnson had to say on an Atlanta radio station last week. Unfortunately for him, I came on just after him, and the hosts, who were 2 libertarians, were floored by his statements. Quote, this is Johnson, "We own the Federal Reserve. There is this misconception that the Federal Reserve is some private entity," unquote. This is so not true, Gary, and every libertarian knows it. Numerous federal court decisions have all held that the Fed is not a part of the U.S. government. The latest was 1982 in Lewis versus the United States, where the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit stated, quote, "The reserve banks are not federal instrumentalities, but are independent, privately owned, and locally controlled corporations," close quote. You aren't talking to your usual audience of the Republican uninformed here. Last night we heard Peter Schiff, who railed against the propensity of both government and individuals to borrow their way into oblivion. But that's not the way Governor Johnson saw it last week on the same show. Quote, "It's one thing to borrow money, which is an okay phenomenon, but it's another thing to print money." Then later on, just in case you thought he might have misspoken, quote, "Borrowing is okay, printing money, that's what we need to stop," close quote. If you read my book, No More National Debt, you'll find out that we are not printing money. Every time the national debt limit is raised, we are actually going out and borrowing every dollar of that debt limit increase. It is absolutely shocking that Johnson understands so little about the American monetary system. Johnson is pretty conflicted when it comes to borrowing and debt in other ways as well. This is a Johnson quote. "I think we all really want to help those truly in need, but I think we've gone way beyond that, and let's live within our means," close quote. Oh, really? There's only one candidate in the Libertarian race who is not living within his means, and that's Governor Johnson. According to his January 31st Federal Election Commission report, the Johnson campaign was over $203,000 in debt. And now he continues campaigning in the hopes that we libertarians will pull him out of the hole with fundraisers around the country. This is beginning to sink in with libertarians. So now here's the interactive question number 2. How many think that we need to start prosecuting those who rob the American people blind with their fake mortgages, phony derivatives, and subsequent bailouts? How many here think that Newt Gingrich needs to be prosecuted for helping to cover up the fact that Freddie and Fannie were leveraged 80-1? Well, Mr. Johnson thinks differently. Quote, I'm asked about criminal prosecution for those on Wall Street. You know what? It's probably because none of them committed any crimes. They just made some incredibly bad decisions, close quote. This was in the Florida debate. I have it on tape. It's on my website. The crimes, Mr. Johnson, are documented in Professor Janet Tavicoli's new book, The New Robber Barons. I put all of these with actual audio and video of Governor Johnson's voice making these quotes on my campaign site, still2012.com. So what am I going to do for you? What I bring to this party is new people. My first documentary, The Money Masters, has been viewed by tens of millions of times over the internet. When they shut down Google Video, The Money Masters had over 20 million views. My YouTube channel with my new film, The Secret of Oz, and my Still Reports segments have in the past year gotten 1.3 million views on YouTube. And that's just on my channel, not counting the hundreds of sites who pick up my stuff to raise their own audience numbers. I bring a huge new set of people to this party. No Libertarian presidential candidate has ever gotten 1 million votes. Bob Barr only got 500,000. And I'm not alone. My chief economic advisor, Carl Denninger of Market Ticker fame, is way bigger than me. He gets 300,000 unique hits on his blog every week. Denninger is the one who first coined the phrase Tea Party. My executive committee has Stephanie Jaski on it. She founded Fed Up USA. If you want this brand new audience, only I can deliver it. Only I can deliver an unprecedented vote total to the LP.